You know why we're doing this?
I was forced to marry the most feared man in the Mafia. He never had to hurt me to scare me. The calm way he looked at me was enough, as if he already knew that sooner or later, I'd have nowhere left to run. The more he tried to be good to me, the more suspicious I became. The more he tried to seduce me, the more I feared what lay behind that mask. I wanted to escape. I wanted to take back my freedom before it was too late. But when I found out the truth about my marriage, everything changed, and the moment I was finally free to leave, I realized it wasn't freedom I wanted anymore. That's when I knew I was already lost. Hi, I'm Lena, and this story is just beginning. Chapter 1. Delivered. The dress hung on the bedroom door like a sentence, white, long, with a veil someone had folded with surgical care, someone I didn't know. Chosen by people I'd never met, paid for with money that wasn't mine. I stood there staring at it for too long, as if waiting would make the fabric disappear and take everything it meant along with it. My father was downstairs. My mother was in bed, door closed, oxygen running. Nobody came up to help me get dressed. Nobody asked if I wanted a bouquet, different shoes, one more minute. The dress was beautiful. I'd give it that. A cold, impersonal kind of beauty. The kind of garment that wasn't made to please the one wearing it, but to impress the ones watching. I pulled the dress on by myself, hands shaking on the buttons at the back, and thought about what my father had said 2 weeks before. He'd shown up in the kitchen on a Sunday night, hollow-eyed and wearing a wrinkled suit like someone who hadn't slept in days. He sat down at the table without taking off his coat and stayed quiet until I turned off the stove and sat across from him. Dominic Ashford, my father, a Cleveland merchant, the man who disappeared for weeks and came back with shorter and shorter excuses, looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face. It wasn't shame. It was something worse. It was the face of someone who had already decided. "I owe money," he said, "to people who don't forgive debts." I remember leaning back against the chair and feeling the cold plastic through my shirt. I remember asking, "How much?" and him shaking his head as if the amount were irrelevant. I remember thinking about my mother in the next room, hooked up to a machine that cost more than we could afford, and feeling the weight of the world squeeze my chest with both hands. "There's a family in Chicago," he went on, without looking at me, "the Caradeos. The son took over. He agreed to forgive everything, but there's a condition." I knew before he finished. I knew from the way he couldn't lift his eyes, from the way his hands clenched on the table, from the silence that hung between one sentence and the next, as if he were giving me time to put the pieces together on my own. "He wants to get married," my father said, "to you." The groom's name was Caspian Caradeo. I didn't know the face, didn't know the age, didn't know anything beyond the last name and what it stood for. I looked him up that night, locked in the bathroom with my phone in my hand, and my heart beating way too fast. I found almost nothing. A grainy photo in an article about a restaurant in Chicago, a man in a dark suit, half in profile, with a razor-cut jaw, and eyes that gave nothing away, the kind of face that doesn't smile for the camera because it doesn't need to. The article referred to the Caradeo family as entrepreneurs in the hospitality and entertainment sector, which was a polite way of not saying what everyone already knew. I said yes the next day, not because I wanted to, but because I looked at my mother's bedroom door and saw no other way out. And now here I was in Cleveland, wearing the white dress of a bride who hadn't chosen a thing. Not the dress, not the altar, not the man, trying to fasten the last button at my back with numb fingers. When I finally managed, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman standing there. She looked calm. I wasn't. The ceremony was in Cleveland, at a hotel downtown I'd never set foot in, even though I'd walked past it my whole life. Dark stone facade, glass doors with gold trim, the kind of place that screamed old money in every detail. My father drove the 20-minute ride without saying a word, and I spent the whole way staring out the window, counting traffic lights and trying not to think about what was waiting on the other side. 2 men in black suits were waiting at the entrance. Neither smiled. One of them opened the car door for me and said, "This way," with the same tone as someone announcing the next subway stop. The room was small for a wedding. No flowers, no music, no decor beyond a mahogany table with papers and pens. On the groom's side, 6 men lined up against the wall, dark suits, closed-off expressions, the kind of presence that makes the air feel heavier. On my side, nobody. My father stayed by the door, hands in his pockets, eyes glued to the floor, as if he'd already done his part. An elegant man with silver hair combed back, and eyes that seemed to appraise every person in the room, as if calculating their market value conducted the proceedings. Thibaut Moreau. I found out later he was the family's counselor, the conciliere, the only man who had permission to disagree with the boss. At that moment, he was reading clauses and pointing to where to sign with the emotion of someone going through a grocery list. Name here, initials there, date in the corner. And then Caspian walked in. The entire room changed. It wasn't noise. It was the opposite. The air seemed to rearrange itself around him, as if even the space knew who was in charge. He was taller than the photo suggested, and broader in the shoulders, with the kind of physical presence that makes you take a step back without realizing it. The black suit looked like it had been sewn onto him, not a fold out of place, not a crease that wasn't intentional. On his right hand, a gold ring with an engraved crest. The face was the same as the photo, rigid jaw, dark eyes, a mouth that didn't seem used to smiling, handsome in a way that made my stomach flip, and I told myself it was fear. It was fear. He walked to the table without looking at anyone and stopped beside me. I smelled the cologne before I felt his presence, something woody and expensive that blended with the hotel's scent and filled the space between us like a third person. He looked at me. It wasn't the look of a groom seeing the bride for the first time. It was an inventory look, cold, precise, unhurried. His eyes traveled from my face to the dress and back to my face, and I had the horrible feeling that he was checking whether the merchandise matched the negotiation. I wanted to say something, anything to break that silence and hand me back a piece of control, but my mouth was dry and the words refused to come out. And he'd already turned his attention back to Thibault, who was pointing at something in the documents. The ceremony lasted 11 minutes. I counted. Thibault read the essentials, indicated the signature lines, and everything happened with the bureaucratic efficiency of a property transfer. When it came time to sign, my hand was shaking. The pen was heavy, black, with gold detailing, and the ink came out steady, which felt like a betrayal by my own body. Caspian signed after me. His handwriting was controlled and tilted to the right. No flourish, no hesitation. But the pen paused for half a second before touching the paper. So brief I only registered it later, when it was already too late to know what it meant. When Thibault gathered the papers, I thought someone would say something. Congratulations. Good luck. Any empty formality to mark the moment. Nobody did. Caspian tucked the pen into the inside pocket of his suit, adjusted his shirt cuff, and turned to me. "The jet leaves in 2 hours," he said. The voice was deep and low, the kind of voice that doesn't need volume to be heard. "Bring only what matters." "Where to?" I asked, and my voice came out smaller than I wanted. "Chicago," he said, as if the word were obvious, and he left. Just turned and walked toward the door, and the 6 men in suits moved behind him as if there were an invisible thread pulling them all in the same direction. Thibault collected the folder, gave me a brief nod that could have been either a greeting or condolences, and followed the others. I stood in the middle of the empty room, ring on my finger and the bitter taste of ink on the tip of my tongue. My father appeared in the doorway. He opened his mouth as if he were about to say something, but I walked past him without stopping, because if I stopped I was going to cry, and I had promised myself I wouldn't give any of them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Outside, a black car waited with the engine running. The man who opened the door was enormous, blonde, with shoulders too broad for his suit, and an expression so blank it looked carved from stone. He didn't say good morning, didn't say congratulations, didn't say anything. He opened the door and waited with the mechanical patience of someone who does it 20 times a day. Later I'd find out his name was Stellan, Caspian's right-hand man, Norwegian, ex-military, and 10 words a day was his generous limit. Inside the car, I clutched my bag against my chest and looked out the window as Cleveland passed by. The same streets I knew by heart, the same buildings as always, but seen from inside a car that didn't belong to that world. It was strange seeing my city like that, through the tinted glass of a sedan that cost more than the house I grew up in, like I was already leaving before I'd left. The car stopped in front of my house. Stellan didn't say anything, just opened the door and waited. I ran upstairs, shoved everything that fit into the small suitcase, and stopped at my mother's bedroom door. The oxygen hissed softly, and she was sleeping with her face turned toward the window. I wanted to go in, wanted to wake her, wanted to tell her I was leaving and might not be back anytime soon. But if I went in, I wouldn't be able to walk out. So I pressed my forehead against the door, said, "I love you," quietly enough not to wake her, and went downstairs with the suitcase bumping against the steps. The jet was another thing I wasn't ready to process. White, with a gold stripe along the side and the family crest on the tail, a wolf over 2 crossed swords. Inside, beige leather seats, dark wood tables, and the kind of silence that only exists in places where money has bought even the absence of noise. I picked the seat farthest from the entrance and sat by the window, hoping the distance would give me some illusion of control. It didn't. Caspian walked in, scanned the entire cabin with that efficient way he had of calculating exits and threats in under 2 seconds, and sat next to me. Not in the front seat, not in the back. Next to me, as if every other empty seat on the jet didn't exist. I froze. He must have noticed, because he stayed silent for almost a full minute, which, in that tiny space between us, felt like an eternity. Then he said, without looking at me, "There's food if you want, and the blanket is in the compartment on the right." I blinked. Of everything I'd expected to hear from the man I'd just been forced to marry, orders, threats, indifference, instructions on where to find the blanket were not on the list. The sentence was so out of place that I blurted out before I could stop myself. "Are you giving me the in-flight safety briefing?" He turned his head toward me. The dark eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made me want to shrink into my seat, but the corner of his mouth, the right corner, to be exact, moved. It didn't quite become a smile. It was the ghost of one, a hint that somewhere beneath that layer of ice, there was something that recognized humor. "The seatbelt's automatic," he said, "but if you need help, Stellan's in the front cabin." I didn't know if that was a joke or a literal piece of information. With him, I suspected the two things were the same. I turned to the window and watched the clouds form beneath us as the jet climbed, and thought, with a cold, terrifying clarity, I married a stranger, and I'm on a plane with no idea where I'm going. The rest of the flight passed in silence. Caspian opened a folder of documents and spent the next hour and a half reading, annotating, and signing papers with the same relentless focus he seemed to apply to everything. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt him next to me. The body heat, the sound of his controlled breathing, the dry scratch of the pen on paper, and my nervous system refused to shut down. It was like trying to sleep next to a controlled fire. The key word being controlled, because I had absolutely no guarantee it would stay that way. When the jet landed, the sun had already disappeared behind the buildings, and the Chicago sky was a smear of orange and gray along the horizon. Stellan opened the door with the same silent efficiency he brought to everything, and the cold night air swept into the cabin like a warning. Another black car waited on the tarmac. I climbed down the stairs holding the dress with one hand and my bag with the other, and looked around trying to spot anything that would tell me where I was. City lights in the distance, a private airport with more guards than employees, and ahead, a dark road lined with trees that hid whatever lay at the end. Inside the car, I watched through the window as Chicago passed in blurs of concrete and light. I didn't know the city. I didn't know the man I'd just married. I didn't know where I was going. The only thought looping in my head, like a scratched record, was, what have I done? The drive took 20 minutes. When the car stopped, I lowered the window and saw the mansion. It wasn't a house. It was a statement. Dark stone, 3 stories, tall windows with golden light slipping through the curtains, and a columned entrance that looked like it had been stolen from some European palace and replanted on the outskirts of Chicago. The garden was immaculate, hedges trimmed with geometric precision, a stone path lit by low lanterns, and in the background, the silhouette of a fountain I couldn't quite make out in the dark. Caspian got out of the car without waiting for Stellan to open the door. He adjusted his suit, looked at the mansion the way someone checks that everything's in place, and then turned to me. He held out his hand. I looked at that hand, large, the signet ring gleaming under the lantern light, and for a second, I considered not taking it. But my legs were numb from the flight, and the dress's heels were a death trap, so I placed my hand in his and let him help me out. His fingers closed around mine with a firmness that was neither gentle nor rough. It was automatic, as if holding things with excessive care were a reflex he couldn't turn off. He let go the second I was on my feet, and the absence of his touch was so abrupt I almost felt cold. Inside, the mansion was everything I expected and feared at the same time. High ceilings, dark marble floors, a wide staircase that split into 2 at the top like open wings. Everything was too clean, too quiet, too big for a family that, from what I'd seen so far, amounted to a man of few words and a Norwegian who spoke none. Caspian stopped at the foot of the stairs and turned to me. "Your room is on the 2nd floor. East wing," he said. "Stellan will show you the way." "My room," I repeated, and it wasn't a question. He tilted his head, as if the repetition were unnecessary. "Your room," he confirmed. "Do you need anything?" I almost laughed. Almost. Because the list of things I needed at that moment started with my life back, and ended with an explanation of what's going on, and neither one fit into a polite answer. So I said, "No." He nodded once, and went up the stairs without looking back. I stood in the hall, with Stellan waiting beside me in silence, and followed him when I realized standing there wasn't going to change anything. The room was the size of the entire apartment I lived in back in Cleveland. Huge bed, heavy curtains, a window overlooking the lit-up garden below. Stellan opened the door, turned on the light, and left without a word. I walked in, closed the door behind me, and then I saw 4 men, outside, positioned in the hallway like statues in suits. 2 on each side of the door, armed. I saw the guns before I closed the door, the bulk under their jackets, the rigid posture of men who know how to use them. My heart hammered in my chest, and I turned the key in the lock with trembling hands, pressed my back against the door, and slid down to the floor. 4 guards outside my bedroom door. I didn't know if they were there to protect me or to keep me from leaving. And that night, sitting on the cold floor of a room that wasn't mine, in a city I didn't know, married to a man whose name I could barely pronounce, I realized that maybe the difference between the two didn't matter. The result was the same. Chapter 2. The Monster Who Sends Flowers. I woke up disoriented, sunlight slipping through a gap in the curtain and hitting my face like a badly aimed spotlight. For 3 seconds, I thought I was in Cleveland, in my cramped bedroom, with the sound of traffic and the smell of coffee my mother used to make before I left for work. Then I opened my eyes for real, and saw the high ceiling, the enormous bed, and the curtains in a shade of gray that seemed to have been chosen by someone who thought color was a sign of weakness. I sat up and looked around. The room was still silent, with that aggressive hotel-grade cleanliness where everything looks untouched, because nobody actually lives there. My suitcase was in the corner, small, beat up, holding 3 changes of clothes and 2 books. Next to the suitcase, a door I hadn't noticed the night before. It was a closet, and not just any closet, the kind that has more space than my mother's living room, with built-in lighting and dark wood shelves from floor to ceiling. And it was full. Dresses, blouses, skirts, shoes, all organized by color with the reverent care of someone curating a museum exhibit. I pulled out the first dress, navy blue, fabric that slipped between my fingers like water, and it looked like it was made for a woman who was 5'11". I'm 5'4". I held it up against my body, and the dress cleared my feet by a generous margin, dragging on the floor like a makeshift train. The second, same problem. The third was a white silk blouse that hit my thigh like a dress. The shoes were 2 sizes too big. I slid my foot into a black stiletto and it wobbled like a boat. I took it off, put it back, and stared at that entire closet of wrong clothes. He'd bought a full wardrobe without getting a single piece right. I didn't know if it was carelessness, or if Caspian Caradillo thought he'd married a volleyball player. I wore the silk blouse as a dress, because it was that or the wedding gown, and went downstairs. I followed the smell of coffee to what I assumed was the kitchen. Wrong. It was the dining room, table set for 30, with china plates, silver cutlery, napkins folded into fans, and juice pitchers lined up end to end. For 30 people, the room was empty. I sat at the head because it didn't matter, and a woman in a uniform appeared, placed a cup of coffee in front of me without saying good morning, and disappeared. I drank the coffee staring at the 29 empty seats, and thought it might have been the loneliest meal of my life. After coffee, I went back upstairs. The 4 guards were still at the door, in the same position, as if they hadn't moved a millimeter the entire night. 2 on each side, hands clasped in front of their bodies, expressions like cinder blocks. I looked at them, they looked at me, and nobody said a thing. I went into the room and sat on the bed. Reality crashed down on me with the weight of a piano. I was in a mansion in Chicago, married to a man I didn't know, surrounded by armed men, wearing a blouse that wasn't mine, in a room that wasn't mine, and nobody had told me what I could or couldn't do, whether I was a wife or a prisoner, or something in between that didn't have a name yet. I grabbed my phone and called Delphine. Delphine Brossard was my best friend since college, a French woman from Lyon who came to the States to study enology, stayed, and now worked as a sommelier at a restaurant in downtown Chicago. She spoke her mind, drank wine like it was water, sent 6-minute voice messages at 3 a.m, and was the only person in the world who could make me laugh when I didn't want to. I hadn't told her anything. I didn't have time, didn't have the nerve, and part of me felt like if I said it out loud, the situation would become real in a way I wasn't ready to accept. She picked up on the second ring. "Sarah, I called you 3 times yesterday. You disappeared. You okay?" I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I got married," I said. The silence on the other end lasted 4 seconds. "You what?" "I got married, Del. Yesterday, in Chicago, to a man I don't know. Serafina Ashford," she said, and I could tell from her tone she'd gone from shock to fury in record time. "If this is a joke, I'm coming over there and killing you myself. If it's not, I'm coming over there and killing him. Either way, I'm coming." I told her everything. The father, the debt, the 11-minute ceremony, the jet, the mansion, the guards. Delphine listened with progressively louder sounds of outrage. A quiet, "No, here, you're kidding there," a mon dieu that cut through the phone like a slap. When I finished, she was quiet for a stretch that, coming from Delphine, was alarming. "Let me get this straight," she said slowly. "You married a mobster. You're locked in a mansion. There are armed guards outside your bedroom door, and you're telling me this over the phone like it's a routine update? Is this a movie or am I drunk?" "Neither. Sarah, I swear on everything I love I'm coming over there even if I have to break down the gate. Send me the address." "I don't know the address, Del. I don't even know what neighborhood I'm in." She let out a string of words in French that I didn't understand, but the tone was self-explanatory. Then she took a deep breath and said, "Okay, listen, I'm going to find out where you are. I'm coming, and we're going to figure this out. You're not going through this alone, you hear me?" My eyes stung, but I didn't cry. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the ceiling with the phone pressed against my chest. Then I opened my contacts and hovered my finger over my mother's name for nearly a minute. I called. The nurse answered. Donna, the same tired voice as always, and said she was stable, that the oxygen had been adjusted that morning, and that she'd been asking about me. "Tell her I'm fine," I said. "Tell her I'm in Chicago, working." The lie came out smooth, because it was the kind of lie I already knew how to tell before I got there. The rest of the day passed with the slowness of a broken clock. I paced the room, tried to read, gave up. Tried again, gave up again. I didn't see Caspian, didn't see Stellan, didn't see anyone except the woman in the uniform who appeared at lunchtime with a tray and left with the same ghostly efficiency. In the middle of the afternoon, someone knocked on the door. I opened it expecting the tray and came face to face with a flower arrangement the size of a shrub. White lilies, dozens of them, mounted in a black vase with black ribbons at the base. The arrangement was solemn, fragrant, and flawless, and it looked, with striking accuracy, like a funeral arrangement. I stared at those flowers and felt a nervous laugh climb up my throat. He'd sent funeral flowers. The head of a mafia family, the owner of a mansion with more guards than furniture, had sent an arrangement that looked like it belonged at the wake of an Italian great-aunt. I went to the door. The 4 guards stared at me with the usual expression, none. But Stellan was there too, standing beside them with a tablet in his hand and the upright posture of someone born in military formation. Who sent the flowers? I asked. Stellan looked at me with the most expressionless blue eyes I'd ever seen in my life. Mr. Carideo. He requested beautiful flowers. I looked at him, looked at the arrangement behind me, looked at him again. Tell him I'm alive, not being laid to rest. Stellan blinked once. The Norwegian equivalent of a belly laugh. I'll pass that along, he said, and walked down the hallway with the tablet under his arm. I closed the door, leaned against it, and let the laugh out. Short, nervous, a little hysterical. But it was the first time I'd laughed since Cleveland, and for a second the knot in my chest loosened. Night fell, and I lay in the too big bed, staring at the too high ceiling, thinking about too many things. I fell asleep after midnight. I dreamed about my father, about the ceremony, about Caspian standing next to me without smiling. I woke up all at once, heart racing, breath caught, hair stuck to my forehead. I sat up in bed and reached for the nightstand. My hand touched a glass. There was a glass of water there. Thick glass, filled halfway, with a bead of condensation running down the side. It hadn't been there when I went to bed. Beside it, folded in half with precision, a piece of heavy paper with a line in black ink. I picked up the paper and tilted it toward the moonlight. Drink the water. The nightmare will pass. The ink was steady, but looking closely I saw what appeared to be a crease in the paper, as if he'd folded it, unfolded it, and folded it again before deciding to leave it, as if writing 3 words had taken more than one try. I knew that handwriting. I'd seen it signing the documents that sealed my fate. Someone had come into my room while I slept, made it past the guards, opened the door, placed a glass of water and a note, and left without waking me. And that someone was the same man I'd been trying not to think about since the jet landed. It wasn't gentle, not exactly. It was functional. Drink the water. The nightmare will pass. Direct, almost cold. But he knew I'd had a nightmare, which meant he'd been awake, which meant he'd been paying attention. I drank the water. I tucked the note into the nightstand drawer without knowing why. I lay down and stared at the ceiling until sleep came back, and the last thought I had before closing my eyes was that, of all the fears I'd carried with me from Cleveland, the most dangerous one wasn't the armed man on the other side of the door. It was the glass of water on the nightstand. The next morning I went downstairs expecting the same table set for 30 and the same empty chair. The table was there. The 30 places were still there. But in the chair across from mine, Caspian was sitting. He was holding a coffee cup with his right hand, the signet ring gleaming under the window light, and reading something on his phone with the attention of someone decoding a war treaty. The dark suit, the shirt buttoned to the second-to-last button. He looked so perfectly put together at 7 in the morning that I felt an irrational flicker of irritation, considering I was standing there in the wrinkled silk blouse with my hair in a bun that defied gravity. He looked up when I stopped in the doorway. He didn't say good morning. He didn't smile. He just looked at me with that intensity I still didn't know how to read. I sat down, pulled the coffee cup toward me, and took a long sip. He didn't go back to reading. He was watching me, still, with the patience of someone who could wait as long as it took. And there, beneath that gaze that weighed like lead, I felt something shift inside my chest. It wasn't fear. There was still fear, plenty of it. But there was something else alongside it, warm and unsettling, that settled beneath my ribs and refused to leave. And I realized, with a sting that scared me, that what I felt wasn't just fear. Chapter 3. The Close. Too Close breakfast with Caspian lasted 12 minutes. I know because I counted. It was the second time I'd timed something related to him, and the pattern was starting to worry me. During those 12 minutes, he drank coffee, read something on his phone, and looked at me 4 times. I drank coffee, ate a tasteless piece of toast, and pretended I didn't notice any of the 4 times. He left without saying goodbye. He stood up, adjusted the button on his suit with that automatic gesture I already recognized, and walked to the door. At the threshold, he stopped and half-turned in my direction. The clothes are being replaced. What? The clothes in the closet. They were the wrong size. They're being replaced today. And he left, without waiting for an answer, without apologizing, without explaining how he knew. I sat there staring at the empty doorway, with the toast suspended in midair, and thought 2 things at once. Someone had reported the closet disaster, and he cared enough enough to fix it. I didn't know which one bothered me more. I spent the morning exploring the mansion with the 4 guards trailing me at a distance, like shadows in suits pretending they weren't there. On the ground floor, besides the imperial dining room, there was a living room nobody used, a study with a door that was always closed, and a professional kitchen with marble countertops. On the second floor, the west wing was off limits. One of the guards materialized in front of me when I tried to turn down the hallway and shook his head once. But it was at the end of the east corridor that I found the library. The door was ajar. I pushed it open and the smell hit me first. Old paper, leather, and wood. That scent of books that haven't been touched long enough to develop personality. Floor-to-ceiling shelves on every wall, a wooden ladder on rails, and in the center, 2 dark leather couches and an armchair around a low table. Novels, essays, philosophy, history, all mixed together with no order, as if someone had bought an entire bookstore and dumped it onto the shelves without bothering to organize. Nobody used that library. I could tell by the uniform dust and the untouched position of the volumes, so I did the only thing I knew how to do when the world didn't make sense. I started organizing. I spent the following days in that room. I pulled books off the shelves, sorted them by year of publication, wiped down the spines, and built stacks on the floor, on the couch, on every available surface. There, in the middle of that organized chaos, I was myself again, not the purchased wife, not the prisoner of the East Wing. I was Seraphina Ashford, librarian from Cleveland, doing the one thing I'd always known how to do right. One evening, I was sitting on the floor with books stacked around me like paper fortress walls, glasses crooked and the messiest bun in the history of buns, when I felt someone at the door. Caspian was leaning against the door frame, arms crossed, in the dark suit and the unreadable expression. But something was different. He wasn't passing through. He was standing with his body turned toward me, and his eyes moving across the room with a slowness that made me realize he'd been there longer than I thought. I froze, sitting on the floor, surrounded by books, looking like someone who'd lost a fight against a bookshelf. He looked at the stacks, at my system, at the book in my hand. Then he looked at me. By genre or by author? The voice was low, unhurried. By year of publication, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. He considered that for a moment. Interesting, he said, and left. I sat there with my heart beating double time, and the book pressed against my chest, staring at the empty door frame. One word. He said one word, and my body reacted as if it had heard a declaration. I didn't know if it was the tone, the weight of his gaze, or the fact that, of everything he could have said, he chose the one question that showed he recognized what I was doing. The following evening, Caspian's second gentle disaster happened. I went downstairs for dinner and found the room transformed. The table that had been set for 30 now had 2 places, one across from the other, with lit candles, crystal glasses, linen napkins, and 3 waiters positioned along the wall like soldiers awaiting orders. For 2, with 3 waiters. I stopped in the doorway and almost went back upstairs. The scene looked like a marriage proposal staged by someone who'd never seen a marriage proposal and researched it on the wrong website. The excess was so sincere, it hurt. Caspian was already seated. Dark shirt, no suit for the first time, which, on him, was the equivalent of being in pajamas. The rolled-up sleeves revealed his forearms, and I looked away too quickly. I sat across from him. The waiters moved in sync, pouring water and adjusting cutlery with the precision of a rehearsed choreography. Then, silence. 2 full minutes, with the candles flickering between us like embarrassed witnesses. He held his glass without drinking. I held my napkin without knowing where to put it. I couldn't take it. You know, dinner for 2 requires conversation, right? He looked at me, blinked, as if the information were new. Go ahead, he said. About what? Whatever you want. I looked at him, at the candles, at the 3 waiters, and said the first thing that came to mind. What kind of flowers aren't funeral flowers? Caspian went quiet, considering the question with the same seriousness he probably brought to multi-million-dollar negotiations. In the back of the room, Stellan, leaning against the wall with his hands behind his back, almost, smiled. The corner of his mouth moved 1 millimeter before returning to its original position. I understood in that instant that Stellan saw everything, understood everything, and was entertained by everything, but would rather die than show it. The next morning, a small vase of white and yellow daisies appeared on the breakfast table. No black ribbon, no funeral overtones. I looked at the flowers and felt something tighten in my chest that wasn't fear. 2 days later, Delphine showed up. I was in the library when Stellan opened the door and said, in the flattest voice in the world, "Visitor." Delphine came in behind him like a hurricane of brown hair, red scarf, and French outrage. She looked at the library with wide eyes, then at me, then at the library again. "Sarah, this place is bigger than my entire apartment, the entire building, including the parking garage." She hugged me so hard my ribs protested, then held me by the shoulders and examined me head to toe. When she spotted the built-in wine cabinet in the corner of the room, she pulled out a bottle, checked the label, and her eyes went wide. That's a 2010 Barolo tossed on a shelf like it's a decoration. I hate him on principle, but the wine collection offends and delights me at the same time. We went upstairs. In the hallway, Delphine crossed paths with Stellan coming from the opposite direction. She stopped, looked him up and down, which took effort, given he was nearly 6'6", and turned to me with her hand on her chest. My God, even the bodyguards are gorgeous here. Stellan walked straight past without changing his pace or his expression. I grabbed Delphine by the arm before she could make any comments in French. In the room, sitting on the bed, she lowered her voice. Is he horrible? I thought about the note, the glass of water, the question about the books, the daisies. I thought about the guards, the locked door, the gaze that made me want to step back and lean forward at the same time. He sent a funeral arrangement on the first day. Delphine nearly spit out the wine she'd brought up from downstairs. A funeral arrangement? Was he trying to kill you or date you? I couldn't answer, and the fact that I couldn't scared me more than any answer would have. Delphine left in the late afternoon with a promise to come back and a threat to bring reinforcements. I watched her leave from the bedroom window and felt the loneliness return before the car disappeared through the gate. That night, the air turned cold without warning, the kind of Chicago cold that seeps into your bones without asking permission. I stepped out onto the second-floor balcony to look at the city, arms crossed, trying to absorb something that wasn't the walls of that mansion. Chicago's lights glowed in the distance like an earthbound constellation, and the wind carried a smell of rain that reminded me of Cleveland in a way that squeezed my chest. I felt his presence before I heard the footsteps. Caspian appeared beside me without a word. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. The scent of wood and whiskey arrived before he did, and the air around me shifted the way I already knew it would, growing thicker, heavier, as if the balcony had shrunk. He stood still for a few seconds, looking at the same city I was looking at, and then did something I didn't expect. He took off his jacket and placed it on my shoulders, without asking, without warning, without touching any part of me besides the fabric. The warmth of his body was still in the lining, and it hit me all at once, along with the cologne, which was now on me, around me, so close I could feel every note, as if he himself were wrapping around me. The air left my lungs, and I stood there with my arms crossed and my heart beating at a rhythm that had nothing to do with the cold. He didn't touch me. He stayed there beside me, hands in his pockets, face turned toward the city lights. The distance between our shoulders was only a few inches, too close to be accidental, too far to be an invitation. The wind hit my face and brought his warmth with it, and I thought that, of all the dangerous things I'd faced since Cleveland, the most dangerous was that space between our bodies. You're not the monster I thought you were, I said, and the words came out before I could hold them back. Caspian didn't answer right away. His jaw shifted once, as if he were chewing on the sentence, testing its weight. Then he said, his voice low enough that the wind almost carried it away, maybe I am, just not with you. The sentence hung between us, too heavy for the wind to carry. He gripped the balcony railing with one hand, and I saw his knuckles go white, a tiny crack in that perfect control he wore like a second suit. It lasted 2 seconds. Then his fingers relaxed, the posture returned, and the moment passed so quickly, I almost thought I'd imagined it. I turned my face and looked at him, at the hard profile cut against the city lights, at the tense line of his jaw, at the dark eyes that weren't looking back at me, but that I knew were aware of my every move. He had just told me he was dangerous, that the monster existed, that I was the exception. And the part of my brain that should have felt fear, the logical, rational part from Cleveland, went silent. I didn't give the jacket back. In the middle of the night, I went downstairs for water. The kitchen was nearly dark, with a single low light above the counter, and Caspian was there, standing, leaning against the counter, sleeves rolled up, glass of whiskey in hand. No suit, no armor. His shoulders were lower, his jaw more relaxed, and the dim light softened the hard lines of his face. He looked tired, not the kind that sleep fixes, but the kind that comes from carrying heavy things for too long. He looked up when I stopped in the doorway. I was in a t-shirt and sweatpants, hair down, barefoot. The kitchen was enormous, but the second his eyes met mine, the space shrank. Can't sleep? He asked, his voice lower than usual. No. I walked in slowly, as if moving too fast would break something fragile. You? I never can. The sentence lingered in the air, simple and heavy. I went to the sink, grabbed a glass, and filled it with water, feeling his gaze on my back like physical pressure. When I turned around, he hadn't moved. I should have gone back upstairs. I should have said goodnight and gone back to the room, but my feet didn't obey. I stayed there, leaning against the opposite counter, glass in both hands, and his jacket still on my shoulders, because I hadn't given it back, and he hadn't asked for it. The air between us was thick with something neither of us named, and every passing second made it harder to pretend it didn't exist. When I went back upstairs, I pressed my forehead against the bedroom door and closed my eyes. The jacket was still on my shoulders, and I didn't take it off. I stood there, breathing in the scent of wood and whiskey, and thought that I was in danger, but not the kind I'd assumed. The danger was the warmth beneath my ribs that appeared when he was near, the difficulty breathing that had nothing to do with fear, the urge to stay when everything told me to run. I was thinking about him before I fell asleep, and the fear was turning into something else. Chapter 4. The Truth That Burns. The days passed, and the distance between us shrank without either of us planning it. Caspian stopped sending Stellan. He started showing up in person, without warning, as if testing how close he could get before I pulled away. One morning, I was in the backyard garden sitting on a bench near the fountain, book in my lap and a coat too thin for the cold. I sneezed, hard, the kind that shakes your whole body. I wiped my nose with the back of my hand and went back to the book. 20 minutes later, Caspian came down the stone path with his usual long stride, carrying a heavy coat over his arm and a steaming cup in his hand, with the expression of someone executing a high-priority military mission. He stopped in front of me, held out the coat, and set the tea on the bench. I looked at all of it and said, "I sneezed. I didn't faint." "You're red," he said, as if that settled the matter. "Because it's cold. Then the coat makes sense." I opened my mouth and realized I had no argument. I put on the coat, which was too big and smelled like him, and picked up the tea. Caspian looked satisfied in an almost imperceptible way. His shoulders relaxed 1 millimeter, his jaw unclenched half a degree, and left without another word, hands in his pockets, walking like someone who'd just resolved a matter of state. One evening, I was reading on the library couch when he came in and sat in the opposite armchair with a hardcover. After 20 minutes, I noticed he hadn't turned the page once. I knew because I'd been watching, and the fact that I was watching was already a problem. I needed another book from the top shelf. I stood up, stretched my arm, and couldn't reach it. Before I could grab the ladder, I felt the warmth behind me. Caspian had stood up without a sound, reached over me, and grabbed the book. When he lowered it to hand it to me, his fingers touched mine. The world stopped. The contact was minimal, fingertips against fingertips with the book between us, but I felt that touch travel up my arm and settle in the center of my chest, like an electric current. Neither of us let go of the book. He was too close enough for me to see the variations of shade in his dark eyes, to feel the warm breath of whiskey and mint. He looked at my mouth. I looked at his. Nobody moved. The space between us was shrinking as if its own gravity were pulling one toward the other. The door opened. "Mr. Caradeo, T-Bolt needs you." Caspian closed his eyes for half a second, jaw locked, slow breath through his nose, fingers tightening on the book before releasing it, and left without a word. I stood there with the book pressed against my chest and my heart in my throat. The next morning, T-Bolt Moreau knocked on the library door. 2 spaced, formal knocks. He walked in with his usual elegance, gray suit, and a brown leather folder in his hand, but his expression was different from every other time I'd seen him. It wasn't calculation. It wasn't efficiency. It was the face of someone who'd made a decision against his own nature and still didn't know if he'd done the right thing. "Serafina," he said, and it was the first time he'd used my name. He closed the door behind him and stood still for a moment, his hand still on the handle, as if giving himself one last chance to back out. Then he walked to the coffee table and set the folder down. "Caspian doesn't know I'm here," he said, before opening it, and if he did, it would probably be the last thing I ever did in this house. But I've worked for this family for 32 years, and the one rule I've never broken is, don't destroy the people inside. He looked at me with those eyes that calculated everything, but for the first time there was something more, something that looked, against everything that man stood for, like remorse. "You're inside now, and you deserve to know what you walked into." He opened the folder. Contracts, receipts, bank transfers. I sat down and started reading, and with every line the ground felt less solid. There was no debt. My father had never owed anything. There was no collection, no threat. Dominic had gone to the Caradeo family on his own and offered his daughter in exchange for money, $250,000. The amount was right there, in black ink, followed by the crooked signature I recognized from the birthday cards of my childhood. "Does Caspian know?" I asked, my voice hoarse. T-Bolt looked at me with those eyes that calculated everything. From the beginning, I left the library without looking at him. I went down the stairs, turned down hallways, and found Caspian in the study, standing back to the door. When I walked in, he turned and I saw on his face the exact moment he understood. His eyes went from the documents in my hand to my face, and something in his expression shifted, the face of someone who'd been expecting this moment for weeks and knew he had no defense. I was shaking with rage. "You knew," I said, and the words came out sharp. "This whole time, you knew my father sold me, and you married me anyway. Why?" "Because I saw you," he said, his voice low, almost raw. 6 months ago, at a party. You were laughing and I had never seen anyone laugh like that. The sentence hit me dead center, but not the way he expected. "What party?" I asked, and the anger in my voice gained a new layer, colder. "I've never been to a party in Chicago. I lived in Cleveland, worked at a library, and went out with my friend for cheap wine downtown. At what point in my life would I have been at a party where someone like you was?" Caspian held my gaze without blinking. "The charity gala for your father's foundation. November. He needed a presentable daughter to convince investors he was a family man. You spent the whole night in a corner by the bar, laughing with a woman in a red scarf, and left before midnight. The floor vanished. My father's foundation, the front organization he claimed was philanthropic, and that I'd never questioned. I had been at that event. Delphine had come with me because I hated going alone. I remembered the borrowed dress, the terrible canapes, leaving early because I couldn't stand smiling at strangers anymore. And somewhere in that room, Caspian Caradeo had been watching me. "So you saw me once, 6 months ago, and decided you wanted me," I said slowly, testing the weight of the sentence. "And when my father showed up offering his daughter, you found it convenient." I didn't find it convenient. I found it inevitable. His jaw tightened. "And if I hadn't accepted, he would have offered you to someone else. So you bought me. I took you from a man who was selling you. That doesn't change the fact that you took part. No, it doesn't. He didn't defend himself, didn't justify, didn't explain. He accepted it. And that acceptance disarmed me in a way no apology ever could have, because it gave me nothing to fight against. I went upstairs, locked the door, and cried. For the first time since Cleveland, not out of fear, but out of betrayal. The father I thought I was protecting had turned his own daughter into a bank transaction, and Caspian had known from the start, while he brought tea when I sneezed and wrote notes when I had nightmares. I cried until my eyes burned. For the daughter who thought she was being brave and was being sold. For the mother in Cleveland who didn't know a thing, who I called every other day and told I was fine, that Chicago was beautiful, that the new job was good, while on the other end the oxygen hissed, and her voice grew thinner every week. If she knew her husband had sold their daughter to pay for what wasn't even a debt, the machine keeping her lungs working wouldn't be enough. And I cried because despite everything, despite the lie, the deal, every document in that folder, I didn't want to leave. And that was what hurt the most. I didn't leave the room the next day, or the day after. Sometimes I heard footsteps stop on the other side of the door, heavy, lingering, the kind that belong to a large man who doesn't know what to do with his hands, and then move away without knocking. On the third day, I woke up and saw a white envelope under the door. The firm, right-slanting handwriting on the front told me who it was from before I opened it. I sat on the bed and stared at it for a long time, because some part of me knew that whatever was inside was going to change everything again. Chapter 5. Choices. I opened the envelope with hands still numb from 2 days without leaving the bed. Inside, 3 things. A passport, mine, which I didn't know he had, a black credit card with no limit printed on the back, and a plane ticket. Open-ended. No destination, no date, no restrictions. A ticket to anywhere in the world. No note, no explanation. Not a single line of that slanted handwriting I already knew by heart. But the message was clear. I could leave, and he wouldn't stop me. I sat on the bed with the 3 items in my lap, staring at the ticket as if it were about to explode in my hands. Freedom. That was what I'd wanted since Cleveland, since the dress hanging on the door, since the 11 minutes that sealed my life in a room without flowers. To leave, to go back to my mother, to my apartment, to the public library where the books stayed in the right place, and nobody looked at me, as if I were the most dangerous and necessary thing in the world at the same time. So why weren't my hands moving? I turned the passport between my fingers. My photo stared back at me with that neutral document face, brown eyes, hair pulled back, the expression of someone who didn't yet know what was coming. The photo had been taken in Cleveland, at a notary near the library. On a Tuesday afternoon I remembered because afterward I went for coffee with Delphine, and she complained for 40 minutes about a customer who'd sent back a Pinot Noir because he found it too sour. It felt like another life. It felt like another person. I grabbed my phone and called Delphine. She picked up on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. "Sarah, I called 6 times yesterday. If you hadn't picked up today, I was going over there with the police, the fire department, and a priest, because one of those 3 was going to be necessary." "Del," I said, and my voice came out broken in a way that made her go quiet instantly. I told her everything. The folder, the documents, the father, the $250,000, the lie that had propped up my entire life in Chicago like a rotten foundation under a house I thought was solid. I told her about the confrontation in the study, about Caspian's face when he said, "No, it doesn't," about the 2 days locked in the room staring at the ceiling while I tried to piece together a story I thought I knew, and I told her about the envelope. Delphine listened in silence. For the second time in her life, and both times had been because of me, she had nothing to say. I heard her breathing on the other end, controlled, and pictured the serious face she made when something was too big for a quick answer. The loud Delphine, the Delphine of 6-minute voice messages, the Delphine who had an opinion about everything before you finished your sentence. That Delphine was silent, and that scared me more than anything she could have said. After a stretch that felt elastic, she spoke. "I'm not going to tell you what to do." Her voice was steady, stripped of the usual humor, without the sarcasm I knew like a second language. "But I'll tell you one thing. The guy sent you a funeral arrangement because he doesn't know how to buy flowers. He got you clothes in the wrong size because he'd never paid attention to any woman before. He put 4 guards at your door because he thinks protecting is the only form of love he knows." She paused. "And now he's given you a passport and a ticket to anywhere in the world. He's letting you go, Serafina. and something tells me that's the hardest thing he's ever done. The words kept circling in my head like pieces of a puzzle I refused to assemble, because assembling it meant seeing the full picture, and the full picture was terrifying. "What if I stay, Del?" I asked quietly. "Then you'll know you chose, and choosing is different from being sold." I hung up and stared at the passport, the card, the ticket. I thought about my mother in Cleveland, the oxygen running, the small room that smelled of medicine and longing. I'd called her the night before, from the bedroom floor, my voice controlled enough that she couldn't tell. She told me the neighbor brought soup, that the new nurse was nice, that she missed my messy hair in the morning. I said I'd be back soon. I didn't know if it was true, and now, holding the ticket that could take me to her in a few hours, I needed to decide whether soon meant today or something else. I thought about my father, about the crooked signature on the documents, about his face that Sunday night in the kitchen, the face I thought was desperation, and now knew was calculation. I thought about how I'd spent weeks believing my sacrifice meant something, that the daughter who said yes was saving the family, when in truth the family was the one destroying her. And I thought about Caspian, not his words. I already knew those, had already turned them over from every angle, had already tested them against the rage and seen that they held. I thought about his hands that brought tea the way someone delivers ammunition, that wrote notes the way someone signs orders, that sabotaged bookshelves the way someone sets an ambush just to be in the same room as me, hands that knew how to hurt and chose not to touch me, hands that held a glass of water and placed it by my bed as if taking care of me were a covert operation no one could know about, not even me. He was dangerous. I never doubted that, but his danger wasn't what I thought. I got out of bed, washed my face, put on clean clothes, tied up my hair, and went downstairs. The mansion was quiet in the way I already knew, the heavy silence of a place too big with too few people. I passed the empty dining room, the hallway of dark paintings, and stopped in front of the study. The door was closed. I took a deep breath, felt my heart pounding too loud against my ribs, and knocked. Nobody answered. I opened it. Caspian was standing back to the door, looking through the window that faced the garden. The morning light came through the open curtains and outlined his silhouette against the glass. Broad shoulders, rigid posture, hands clasped behind his back with fingers laced and squeezed with the force of someone holding on to something that threatened to slip away. He didn't turn when I walked in, but I saw his body react. His shoulders rose half a centimeter. His breathing changed rhythm. He knew I was there, and he was waiting. I looked at his back and understood. The envelope wasn't a calculated move, wasn't a strategy, wasn't another play by the head of the Caradeo family. It was a surrender. Instead of justifying himself, instead of arguing, instead of using the power he had to keep me there, and he had it, we both knew he had it, he'd opened the door. He gave me the way out that nobody ever had. Not my father, not life, not the circumstances that had dragged me from Cleveland to Chicago. The only person who offered me a real choice was the man everyone thought took choices away. "Why did you give me the ticket?" I asked. He didn't turn around. "Because you're not a prisoner, and if I leave." The question hung in the air. I saw his shoulders rise with a slow breath, saw his fingers tighten once before relaxing, and when he answered, his voice came out lower than I'd ever heard it, hoarse, restrained, carrying the weight of something he'd been holding longer than I'd imagined. "Then I'll know I did the right thing at least once." He turned around, and his eyes were different. They weren't cold, weren't calculating, didn't have that layer of control I recognized as Caspian Caridio's standard armor. They were vulnerable, open in a way that made me hold my breath, because that was the face he didn't show anyone. The face beneath the boss, beneath the suit, beneath the signet ring, and the last name that made people back away. The face of a man who had watched his father die at a family dinner, who took over an empire the same day, who controlled everything around him because he believed constant vigilance was the price of survival, and who was now standing in front of a woman from Cleveland with his eyes open and his hands empty, waiting for her to leave. I took the ticket out of my pocket and placed it on his desk. "I'm not leaving." He didn't move. His jaw tightened, and his eyes studied me with an intensity I felt on my skin, as if he were searching for the lie, testing the sentence, checking whether I knew what I was saying. Why? Because for the first time, someone gave me the choice to go, and I'm choosing to stay. Caspian closed his eyes. 1 full second. I counted, because by this point, counting his seconds was a reflex I couldn't control anymore. When he opened them, there was something there that hadn't existed before. Relief, gratitude, and something fierce he couldn't hide, glowing behind his dilated pupils like a flame someone had tried to put out and failed. His mouth moved as if it wanted to say something, but no words came out, and I realized that was the kind of silence that says more than any sentence. The silence of a man who had just received the only thing he wanted and didn't know what to do with it. Night fell differently that day. The weight I'd been carrying since Thibault's documents hadn't disappeared, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a rock on my chest. It was something I held with both hands, knowing it was mine and that I'd chosen to carry it. I went to the library. Their place. That was how I already thought of it, without noticing when the library had become their place. I sat on the couch, picked up a book, and opened it to the marked page. The house was quiet, and the lamplight drew warm shadows on the shelves. He came in without knocking. I felt it before I saw it, the air shifting, the temperature rising half a degree, his presence filling the space the way it always did. He stopped at the door, looked at me, and walked to the armchair. But he didn't sit. He stood there, hands in his pockets, watching me with that intensity I no longer pretended not to notice. "You reorganized the poetry section," he said. "It was in the wrong place, mixed in with the essays. I know. I put it there on purpose." I looked up from the book. "Why?" "So I'd have a reason to come here when you came to fix it." The sentence hung between us, simple and devastating. He had sabotaged the organization of his own library to have an excuse to be in the same room as me. Caspian Caradeo, the man who silenced restaurants, who commanded an entire family, who wore control like a second skin, needed an excuse to be near me, and he'd just admitted it out loud, standing in the middle of the library, hands in his pockets, wearing the expression of someone who didn't know if he'd just handed over a weapon or a declaration. He sat on the couch, not the armchair, the couch, next to me, not pressed against me, but close enough for me to feel the heat. The conversation started slowly, the way all of ours did, short sentences and long pauses that kept getting shorter, until the words flowed on their own. The book I was reading, the Cleveland Library, him never being able to sleep. Small things that meant more than they seemed. At some point, the air changed. It grew thicker, warmer, charged with the tension that had followed us since day one. He turned toward me. He raised his hand slowly, as if giving me time to pull back, and touched my face. His fingers rested on my cheek, with a lightness I didn't expect from hands that size. His thumb tracing the line of my jaw, with the slowness of someone memorizing every detail by touch. It was the first time he'd truly touched me. Not to hold, not to protect, not by reflex, just to touch. His skin was warm against mine, and I held my breath as I felt that contact spread through my body like liquid heat. "If you ask me to stop," he said, his voice so low I felt it more than heard it, "I'll stop." I didn't ask. He kissed me, slowly at first, with the restraint of a man who'd spent weeks holding himself back and didn't trust himself not to move too fast. His mouth was warm and firm against mine, and when his lips parted, I tasted whiskey and something sweet I didn't expect, and the last thread of resistance I'd still been holding on to unraveled. His hands traveled from my face to my neck, to my shoulders, to my waist, tracing a slow path that mapped my body with the precision of someone memorizing every curve. I grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled, feeling the taut muscles beneath the fabric, and he responded with a low sound against my mouth that made me lose track of where I ended, and he began. The kiss shifted. The restraint gave way to an urgency we'd both been holding back for weeks, and his hands tightened on my waist with a possessiveness that should have scared me, but made my entire body respond. He laid me down on the couch with one hand on the back of my neck, and the other firm on my waist, bracing his own weight on his arms so he wouldn't crush me. His mouth moved to my neck, and I felt warm lips tracing a line from my ear to my collarbone, slow and deliberate, while I arched my back and gripped his shoulders hard enough to feel every muscle tense beneath my hands. He was big. His body covered mine like a warm shadow, and I felt the weight, the heat, the pressure of his chest against mine, and instead of feeling trapped, I felt anchored. The clothes came off slowly. He removed my blouse with care and his own with impatience, and when skin met skin for the first time, I gasped against his neck. He was warm in a way that seemed to radiate, and his hands traveled over my ribs with fingers spread wide, as if he wanted to feel as much of me as possible at once. I ran my hands over his chest, over the thin scars I could feel but couldn't see in the dark, over the broad back that contracted with my every touch. When he positioned himself between my legs, he stopped. His eyes found mine and stayed there, dark and open, seeking permission with a seriousness that made me understand that this man, the man the entire world feared, was asking me to trust him. I placed my hand on his face and nodded. He entered me slowly, jaw clenched with the effort of holding himself back, and I felt every inch as if he were rewriting something inside me I hadn't known was broken. The rhythm was his, slow, deep, deliberate. He moved with contained precision, but I could feel the cracks underneath, the breath that faltered, the fingers that gripped my waist too hard, the low, rough sound he let out against my neck when I dragged my nails down his back. I panted against his skin as the tension built in waves, each one stronger, each one closer to the edge, and when I said his name, quietly, split in half, he closed his eyes and quickened the pace without losing the depth. The world shrank to that couch, to that body over mine, to the heat that wrapped around us like a living thing. The sentences in my head grew shorter, from complete thoughts to fragments, from fragments to sensations, from sensations to a single point of pressure that climbed and climbed until I couldn't hold on anymore. I shattered with my whole body, gripping his shoulders, and he followed with a deep thrust and a sound against my mouth that vibrated on my lips. We stayed there. He didn't pull away. He stayed heavy and close, hand on the back of my neck, warm breath on my neck. I was lying with my head on his chest, listening to the heart I thought didn't exist, beat too fast beneath his ribs, and I thought that there, in the messy library, on the couch full of books, with the smell of him on my skin and the warmth of him around me, was the first place that had felt right since Cleveland. He ran his fingers through my hair with a slowness that contrasted with everything that had just happened, and said almost inaudibly, "I saw you laughing and thought that, if I could have one thing in life, it would be that." I looked at him, at the open, vulnerable face he only showed when he thought no one was watching. Then make me laugh. He almost smiled. The right corner of his mouth lifted 1 millimeter. His dark eyes shone with something I'd never seen there before, and I knew that half smile was the most Caspian Carideo knew how to give, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. We stayed in the library until sleep came. At some point he got up, grabbed the jacket he'd tossed on the armchair, and placed it over my shoulders with the same automatic gesture of care I already knew. The gesture he made without thinking, without asking, without expecting anything in return, as if protecting were the language his body spoke when his mouth couldn't. I wore the jacket and went upstairs with him, not to my room in the East Wing, to his room in the West Wing I'd never set foot in. The guard stepped aside without a word, and I entered a space that was his in every detail. Dark, organized, smelling of wood, with the curtains open to the Chicago sky. He pulled me into bed with the ease of someone who'd been doing it for years, and I fell asleep with my head on his shoulder and my hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat slow to a calm, steady rhythm that rocked me to sleep. The next morning, I woke up wearing one of his shirts as pajamas, and the side of the bed still warm from where he'd gotten up. On the nightstand, a glass of water and a note, the firm handwriting, tilted to the right, that I already knew by heart. Breakfast at 8. The table is set for 2. I smiled. I put on his shirt, which was too big and smelled of wood and whiskey, and went downstairs. He was at the table, coffee in one hand and phone in the other, and when he saw me in the doorway, hair down, barefoot, wearing his shirt, his eyes darkened in a way that made me blush to the roots of my hair. I sat across from him. The table was set for 2, just 2, and for the first time since I'd arrived at that mansion, the other 28 places weren't there. I drank my coffee looking at him, and thought that choosing to stay had been the most terrifying decision of my life, not because he was dangerous. He was, and I knew he was, and part of me suspected he always would be, but because staying meant accepting that this man, restrained, broken, fierce in ways I was still learning to map, was mine. And I was his. And that this choice came with a weight I still couldn't measure. His world was dark. The people around him carried guns and secrets. His last name opened doors most people didn't even know existed, and closed others I might need. I had chosen to stay, and staying meant walking into that world with my eyes open, without my father's lie as an excuse, without the fake debt as a chain. I was there because I wanted to be, and knowing that was the most liberating and most terrifying thing I'd ever felt. Caspian looked up from his phone and watched me over his cup. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, with that intensity I no longer tried to escape, and I saw at the bottom of those dark eyes the same question I carried. Is it worth the wait? I took another sip of coffee, and stayed. Lena here. That wraps up book 1, and I've already finished book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee. I thought the worst had already happened the day they forced me to marry Caspian Carideo. How naive. The real hell began the day I could have left, and chose to stay. That was the exact moment the weight of the name came crashing down on me like a sentence. The rules, the alliances, the secrets that bleed, and the brutal realization that loving a man like him doesn't have a price, it has a cost. From a hostage, I became the boss's wife, and suddenly, the whole world seemed eager to remind me that I was never supposed to occupy that place. First came the stares, then the whispers, until someone had the nerve to say it out loud, looking right at me. The only question now is who's going to pull the trigger. Nobody laughed. And right then I understood I wasn't getting out alive. As you can see, that was just a little taste of book 2. To watch the full uncensored version, just click the first link in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in just a few seconds. Just a reminder, click that first link down in the comments, and the complete book 2, ad-free and uninterrupted, will be waiting for you. It's that simple. I'm absolutely loving working on book 2. And since you guys are loving it too, I promise there's more to come. This is where you'll find stories that get even steamier, true dark romance. And because this version is getting so much more spicy, the video wouldn't be well received publicly on YouTube. This private space is where I can really show my true essence, and where I feel free to do my best work for you all. Keep in mind that the channel has been demonetized. So this is a way for me to keep my team together and continue bringing high-quality stories to you. I'll have even more updates for you soon. I'll be waiting for you at that first link in the pinned comment. Unfortunately, many people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story, and simply reposting it on YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to receive the next ones, search for My Stories by Lena on YouTube to get the best dark romance content. Remember, the official channel is My Stories by Lena on YouTube. I'll be waiting for you there.